Expected Outcome Video 9. You will understand what lights and principles. Key 5. Control for face advance per blast. Key 5. Charging up. What happens in a shot hole during the blast?
The explosive cartridges are placed right at the toe of the drill hole. The shock tube is placed 150 millimeters from the toe of the hole by being inserted into the front blasting cartridge. The shock tube and the front cartridge will then become what is known as the primer. The correct amount of explosive cartridges, according to the site-specific mining standard, is then placed directly and snugly behind the primer. This is followed with the correct amount of stemming capsules as required by the Mine Health and Safety Act. The explosion occurs at the toe of the drill hole. The shock wave of the blast then travels into the face. This shock wave will first travel forward from the toe and then bounce back towards the toe of the drill hole. As it reaches the toe again, it will start expanding the hole with a bulge effect. As the bulge contracts to its original size, cracks will form in the rock. These cracks will be the same length on both sides of the drill hole. More cracks and wider in diameter will form on the side of the drill hole's free face. The shock wave will follow the road of least resistance and create more cracks on the free face side of the foot hole. The bounce of the shock wave will be followed up by a chemical reaction triggered by the explosion. This chemical reaction will release gas that will enter the cracks created by the bounce shock wave and widen them, resulting in the rock breaking away to the free face side of the drill hole. The gas will enter the cracks on the other side of the drill hole at exactly the same time as the bounce shock wave in the next drill hole passes by. This creates a wedge effect between the gas and the bulge effect, resulting in the rock breaking better as the second hole breaks towards the free face side of that hole. This process repeats itself in milliseconds until all the drill holes have been blasted.
Explosives. Detonator and shock tube explained. Lead primary charge. Delay train. Isolation cup. Aluminium cap. Shock tube. Priming light 5.1. Priming light 5.1. Place primer at the toe of the hole. That is called priming. Explosives light 5.2.
When using stick powder, it is important that the correct diameter loading stick is used. If the loading stick diameter is too small, it will push into the explosive powder, and then the chemical reaction between the different explosive components will not bind correctly with each other. or with the sides of the shot hole, and will thus not fire correctly. We must ensure that the shock tube is placed correctly in the primer. There must always be 150 millimeters of explosives in front of the shock tube to the front of the shot hole. This will ensure an effective shock wave is generated when exploding. We must remember that the loading stick can compact the explosives in front of the shock tube if pushed in too hard. This will affect the distance the shock tube is from the front of the hole. Where stick powder is used, it must be ensured that every stick fuses correctly with each other. Explosives may never be less than 400 millimeters from the collar of the shot hole or more than the burden between the shot holes. Otherwise, transportation of rock to the free face, termed the door, cannot be controlled effectively. The collar part of the shot hole will then always be closest to the free face, and this will result in support being blown out. When using ANFO, we must use the correct pump. This pump will measure the correct amount of ANFO to be used per shot hole. With pumpable explosives, we always have to take into account the amount of swelling and expansion that will take place during the gassing process. Pumpable explosives swell 25% during the gassing process. This will affect the position of the stemming and the shock tube. This swelling must be taken into account when installing stemming and the shock tube. We have to ensure that there is space left for the loading stick guide at the back of the stemming. Stemming must not be placed where it fills the collar or protrudes past the collar. Ensure that the shock tube always has 150 millimeters of explosives ahead of it towards the toe.
Stemming, the installation.
Stemming modules must never be smaller than 6 millimeters of the diameter of the shot hole. Stemming can only provide effective resistance against the movement of blast air if it expands to the width of the shot hole and couples with the size of the shot hole for a period of longer than 20 milliseconds. The expansion of the stemming module and the coupling of the module with the sides are crucial. Therefore, the first stemming module, directly adjacent to the explosives, must couple with the explosives and must absorb the shockwave and expand to the size of the shot hole in order to prevent the gases from escaping through the collar for 20 milliseconds. The first stemming module, placed directly behind the explosives, must couple with the explosive cartridges and cannot just be placed in the shot hole loosely. It must be pushed in softly but firmly with a loading stick. Every stemming module thereafter must get the same treatment. The compression of the stemming module must be executed carefully with a loading stick. It must not be pushed in so hard that it damages the shock tube or moves the shock tube's position to less than 150 millimeters from the toe of the hole. It is important to reiterate that space must also be left between the last stemming module and the collar of the hole. This space must act as a guide for the loading stick. Stemming cannot compensate for poor drilling practice. The main function of stemming is to capture the gas energy for 20 milliseconds. The gas is then more concentrated and can open the cracks created by the shock wave far more effectively. The gas will push open the cracks and result in the transportation of the rock towards the free face, with other words, through the door. It will then not transport the rock toward the collar of the hull. This prevents the loss of support and damage to the sweepings and back areas of the stope. What is gas energy? When the explosion occurs, it first creates a shock wave, and then the chemical reaction in the explosives creates 1,000 liters of gas energy on the average. The shock wave creates the cracks in the rock. The gas energy pushes the cracks in the rock open and breaks the rock towards the area of least resistance.
Detonator, shock tube, shock tube label, connector, connecting clip. Every shock tube number has a different delay time. Connect the shock tubes in numerical order. Ensure that the connectors clip to each other firmly. Delay times between numbers are indicated in milliseconds. Shock tube lengths are determined by manufacturer and by mining standards. Light 4.4 timing, connecting reverse timing. Drill holes without explosives serving as breaking point. "25 milliseconds, hole 1 initiated. 50 milliseconds, hole 2 initiated. 75 milliseconds, hole 3 initiated. 100 milliseconds, hole 4 initiated. 125 milliseconds, hole 5 initiated. 150 milliseconds, hole 6 initiated. 175 milliseconds, hole 7, initiated. 200 milliseconds, hole 8, initiated. 225 milliseconds, hole 9, initiated. 250 milliseconds, hole 10, initiated. 275 milliseconds, hole 11, initiated. 300 milliseconds, hole 12, initiated. 325 milliseconds, hole 13, initiated. 350 milliseconds, hole 14, initiated. 375 milliseconds, the last hole, hole 15, initiated. Reverse timing protects the hanging wall and reduces fall of ground conditions. Timing conclusion. Mining is teamwork.
Timing is probably the most important facet in a controlled blast. We must understand the timing of the shock tubes perfectly. The functionality of shock tubes differ from manufacturer to manufacturer. The way the shock tubes is attached and binds differ drastically from manufacturer to manufacturer. We have to understand these differences to ensure we create the correct firing sequence. If the firing sequence is not perfect, you will not achieve a controlled blast, and it will affect face advance negatively, to say the least. If the firing sequence is wrong, it will increase the risk of misfires significantly. Creating the environment for an effective controlled blast takes teamwork. The teamwork between night shift and day shift is crucial to the success of every blast. Successful mining operations at the end of the day depends on performing the basics with care and ensuring that it is done correctly with teamwork at its heart.
Achieved outcome. Video 9. You now understand which lights and what principles key 5 control for face advance per blast.